Today I want to discuss with you a little bit more on the hints of Chanukah. There is an old video that I made with a hint in the 5 books of Moshe, in the Chumash, where in the verse discussing the war when the enemy comes to our land, Matityahu is hinted with the shortest equidistant skip. And now I'm going to read for you something I wrote on the relationship between Hallel and Chanukah and the hints in the book of Psalms to Chanukah miracle. And also I will discuss a little bit on a different video the hints in prophet Haggai to the holiday of Chanukah. So Chanukah is the only post-biblical holiday when we read the full Hallel. Of course, Hallel is the 6 Psalms we read on Pesach in the beginning, and then on Shavuot, the entire Sukkot, including Shmini Atzeret, and also on Chanukah. Plus, a not full Hallel is read on Rosh Chodesh and the end of Pesach. And the Talmud discusses why. But the Chanukah comes out to be the only post-biblical holiday when we say full Hallel. And the laws of Hallel, in fact, and the laws of Chanukah are related to each other. The Rambam, the Maimonides, for example, discusses the laws of Hallel in the laws of Chanukah. It's in a way the holiday par excellence when we thank Hashem for the deliverance from the enemy and the establishment of the Jewish sovereignty and the possibility of keeping all the mitzvot. Of course, as I mentioned in a different video, this was the main reason. It wasn't just a war of independence. It was a war that brought the possibility of keeping the mitzvot without any hindrance from the enemies, without any persecutions. At any rate, I wanted to note that in 115th and 118th Psalms, in the Hallel, there is house of Aaron mentioned separately. It's mentioned actually 3 times there. Aaron is mentioned 9 times in the entire book of Psalms, right? Most of the Psalms do not mention Aaron. But 9 times that Aaron is mentioned, it's usually Aaron himself. But the house of Aaron, Beit Aaron, is only mentioned in 115th Psalm, 118th Psalm, and 135th Psalm, which incidentally, according to some opinions, is considered Hallel HaGadol. It's kind of extension of Hallel. We say it on Pesach, according to some opinions, in the end of the regular Hallel. Now, the opinion we follow is to read only 136th Psalm as part of Hallel HaGadol. But there was an opinion in the Talmud in Masechet Pesachim that 135th Psalm was included also. So in a way we see that it's specifically Aaron, Beit Aaron, the house of Aaron, that's mentioned specifically in Hallel more than anywhere else. And of course the house of Aaron, the descendants of Aaron, the priests were the ones who were the main participants who brought the Chanukah miracle. So if you carefully read the last 4 Psalms of Hallel, you'll see that there are a lot of hints there to Chanukah. Some of the examples that seem pretty obvious are, one of the Psalms says, "Why do the nations say, where is their God?" So when the Jews were giving up their lives for the sake of keeping the commandments, they were mocked and ridiculed. Why doesn't Hashem help them? But our God is in heaven, He does whatever He pleases. Their idols are the works of human hands. They have mouths, but they do not speak. This may be a hint to the beginning of Chanukah rebellion, when Matityahu refused to sacrifice to the pagan gods. 116th Psalm. We give gratitude to Hashem for the great salvation from danger. Hashem protects the simple, Pitaim. This may hint to the fact that the rebellion started in simplicity. The Jewish rebels didn't have any training in war. They didn't possess sophisticated weapons. They didn't have strategists who knew how to plan war tactics. In a way, it was madness to even start a rebellion with this. They just had no choice. They simply went to war because they had no other choice. They could not know whether Hashem would save them or not. Right? It's not obvious. You might think that, okay, now looking backwards, we know that they were successful. A lot of people died, but at least in the end, they were able to win against all odds. But did it always happen? No, of course not. We had other rebellions that ended in a failure. For instance, Bar Kokhba's rebellion. It's not always true that Hashem will necessarily help. If, for example, a lot of times the generation of the beginning of Soviet power, the Soviet Union, was compared to the generation during Chanukah. As I mentioned in another lesson, that while Hitler was more similar to Haman, so there he just wanted to destroy physically the Jewish people, as opposed to that, the Soviets, they were not against the Jews as a nationality, they were against the Jews as a religion. And at that time, a lot of rabbis lost their lives, and there was no saving. Even if all the Jews would have united to try to keep the mitzvot, they'd be just all killed, probably. It's not always true that every rebellion for the right purpose, Hashem will necessarily help and save. But in this particular case, in the case of Hanukkah, that's what happened. That's what we say in our prayers, that Hashem gave few he gave the many into the hands of the few, the strong into the hands of the weak. Right? This wasn't obvious at all. They weren't necessarily relying on a miracle when they started this rebellion. They just had no choice. They decided that if we cannot keep the commandments, we'll either die or maybe we will win. And in the end, they won. So this is the simplicity of these people, the Tmimut, what's called. 117th Psalm is the shortest psalm in the book of Psalms. It just has 2 verses. So maybe it also hints to the events of purification of the temple, when everybody recognized Hashem's kindness to us. It also may be hinting to the alliance between Hashmonaim and the Romans. Right? Originally, the Romans were actually not so bad, and the Hashmonaim made an alliance with the Romans against the Syrian Greeks, interestingly enough. This treaty of mutual help in case of war was ratified by Roman Senate, and at first the Romans did keep their part of the deal, but later on they conquered Yehuda and started ruling over it. So maybe the 117th Psalm is hinting to all this. The time period when the other nations wanted to become our allies, and the powerful Romans, at that time they were not as powerful as later, but at any rate they decided to make a treaty with the Hashmonaim. At last, the 118th Psalm may be hinting to what happened after all this. Even though the Hanukkah miracle happened, as I mentioned in a different video, the war did not end for another over 20 years. So it describes of all these dangers, of many enemies surrounding us like bees. Many of the episodes described in the books of Maccabees, the way they fought, is very much reminiscent of what it says in the 118th Psalm. And the end is full salvation and our thanksgiving to Hashem. And if you like this video, please press like.